Welcome to Word on the Cloud. My name's Aiko. I'm your host. Hey, everybody. Gonna be honest, I never know how to start off the podcast. But I will say that I hope you're having a good day or a good night, wherever and whenever you may be listening. Welcome. I also wanted to thank the people who have already been listening to the podcast and supporting it. It means the world to me, and I appreciate it 100 times over. So thank you so much for being here. So, I have a question for you guys. What is your idea of a good friend? Now, of course, this answer is whatever you want it to be. It could be someone that you can just rely on to be there when you need them, someone who remembers your birthday, whatever it may be. Take a moment, think about it, and please let me know because I'm genuinely curious. But to me personally, a good friend is someone who cares for your happiness as well as your safety. Not to the same extent that you do, because they should be concerned with their own life and all as well, but it should be something on their radar. And this can be tricky, because they're also not your parent, so it can be hard not feeling like a line's being crossed when we're asking someone to check their behavior. Sure, you've had moments where you want to tell your friend to not put their hand in the fire, as bright and comforting as it can seem to them, and they went for it and ended up getting burned. And I've been noticing a lot of people encouraging their friends to put their hand in the fire, and sometimes it even seems like lava. Is that too dramatic? But when I say toxic, I mean someone who doesn't have your well-being in mind at all and is unable to. I don't want to be the person to say your friends are toxic, cut them off. However, and that's a fancy but, I do want you to consider a few things. One of the first being, how do you feel after you hang out? Do you feel fulfilled and happy? Do you feel drained and worse? Only you know the answer to this, so please ask yourself, how do I feel? I have friends that used to party, and of course there were moments where it was a great time, but after, first the headache and hangover, then there was the drama that would follow after. Either someone would do something silly, or there would be a clash of personalities, in that type of environment that carried over into the following days. Nowadays, when I leave my friends, I feel happy. I feel like I get to know them more each time, and it creates a much stronger bond. So, easy peasy, right? Just ask yourself how you're doing after. Second, what do you talk about when you're with each other? Is it about things you like, things you hate, other people, which coincidentally fit into either of those categories? But it's important to be aware of what you talk about, as that can have an influence on how things go within this friendship, as well as extending out of it. If you're gossiping, talking negatively about others, then that in turn can make you a negative person. And you're holding yourself in a very limited space because there's no growth in a conversation like that. So consider the topics of conversation. And I do want to say that just because there's a disagreement or a differing opinion, that doesn't mean that that person is, quote, toxic and you should cut them off, but it's about how you and the other person handle those disagreements. And one of the last things I want you to ask yourself, what do you do when you hang out? So I have a main friend group, I would say, that hangs out every other week-ish, when we have time, even if it's just a few of us. We've been doing that for a minute now, and we'll have our smoke circle, music playing, everyone's contributing to the playlist. Recently, one of our friends started introducing us to Dungeons & Dragons, which is pretty cool. But we'll hang out, talk about the music, talk about games we're playing, and everyone's involved. Now we have a friend, I'll call her Jane, that's a part of this group, but she slowly started moving towards her own personal group of friends that could be deemed as toxic. Example being, my first impression of one of her friends was a girl who didn't know her drinking limits, then proceeded to projectile vomit over our friends' things, and then within the same night started yelling vulgar sexual things. Which, saying this out loud, the problem seems obvious. However, Jane has always been indifferent, so there's no consequences or concern for this behavior, and it continues on to this day. Not around us, but around Jane. But now, Jane drinks a lot, and doesn't seem to have any consideration for the energy that is given off, and behaves maybe not to the extremes of her friends, but is well on her way, and that's hard, because we love Jane. Of course, this is just my personal example, but if you've identified the toxic in your life, I have a few tips that you're welcome to use, or not, totally up to you. So first, express how you feel. If you're unable to express something that may bother you to your friend, that should be a sign that's not ignored, because if your feelings are not being taken into consideration and you continue to associate with that person, you're becoming a follower to their emotions because maybe you want to avoid conflict. And this can be a difficult conversation to have. Tip I have within this one would be, when I worked customer service, I noticed that avoiding the word you, as in you're doing this, you need to do this, that it was much easier to come to a solution because it wasn't so personal. Arguments and disagreements can be healthy, but it's important to be conscious of the intention. How do I want this conversation to go? What do I need to say to know that I said what I needed to without overstepping the line? Because I know we want our friends to be people we can be truthful with, maybe not so bluntly, but we want to be able to confide in them. And if that's not there, it's just a very surface level relationship. Next, know your boundaries and limits. If you're making the decision to keep that type of company, have boundaries, have limits. If you have no line that can be crossed, you'll just be pulled in any direction. And eventually, like Jane, you may become something you don't want to be. And if you've already expressed your feelings and boundaries and it's still not getting through, start to distance yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. You need to be able to think for yourself and think clearly away from that type of influence. And either they'll get the message and go off on their merry way, or maybe they'll attempt to change. I'm not saying that you wait patiently and hope that they change, but set your own limit to how long you're willing to do that and stick to it. But if it comes down to it just not working, let them go. And of course, we want to hold on to our friends that we've known, and we can love something whether or not it's good for us. But there comes a point where you have to really ask yourself what you want from this life. Because the company you keep really does have the power to influence how that plays out. But do with this information what you will. I do want to thank you for sharing your time and energy with me, and I'll talk to you again soon. Later.